It's often described as a semi-autobiographical novel because of the connections between Bohling's Oxfordshire upbringing and the author's. D.J. Taylor remarks in his biography, Orwell's trick in his previous novels had been to project various aspects of himself onto characters with whom he cannot quite wholeheartedly be identified. Coming Up for Air is the most ingenious and arguably the most effective of these projections, end quote. But it's that process of confrontation and self-confrontation, the holiday that is no holiday, that I think is the most telling point of comparison between Bohling and Orwell. There is no world apart, but there is a parenthesis, a brief breathing space, if you will, to make better sense of his place in the world as it is. Bohling himself rationalises that the reason he has gone back to Lower Binfield midway through the novel is to reacquire a feeling of peace, the better to prepare him for the inevitable war. Quote, it wasn't that I wanted to watch my navel, I only wanted to get my nerve back before the bad times begin. Wherever we're going downwards, into the grave, into the cesspool, no knowing. In outline, what he has done is stand at the graveside of rural England he knew and loved, to bid it farewell, and to turn to face a future that threatens to bury him and his kind. Where can that sustenance necessary for survival come from then? From nature or from man? From the countryside or his fellow countrymen? There should be no disbelieving the rapture that Bohling feels in the presence of nature. Rapture recalled as a child and rapture re-experienced as an adult. It's a rapture we know Orwell experienced in his own childhood, and the book is imbued with the author's fondness for flora and fauna, and of course fishing. Yet Bohling guards against sentimentalising it. He remembers how he used to feel about it, and how he used to feel about it is described in terms that emphasise its unreality. When Bohling describes the forgotten fish pond brimming with monstrous carp he encountered as a boy behind old Binfield house, he says, quote, it was astonishing, even at that age, it has astonished me, that there, a dozen miles from Reading, not 50 from London, you could have such solitude. You felt as much alone as if you had been on the banks of the Amazon. That allusion to the Amazon gets picked up and fleshed out later when he recalls the adventure stories that engrossed him as a child. Quote, I'm 12 years old, but I'm Donovan the Dauntless. 2,000 miles up the Amazon, I've just pitched my tent, and the roots of the mysterious orchid that blooms once in 100 years are safe in a tin box under my camp bed. The natural world upon those first encounters is exotic, unblemished, as dreamy as fiction, and the solitude it promises allows for boundless freedom. But Bohling the man cannot and could not get back to that state. And he has learned to embrace nature, and he's learned that to embrace nature in older age with the same enthusiasm as early youth is to render yourself suspect. When he encounters the cranky old man at the ruined pool area beside Binfield House, he identifies the mentality immediately. Quote, I knew the type. Vegetarianism, simple life, poetry, nature worship, roll in the dew before breakfast. Those treating nature as a refuge can turn it into something as bad as a refuse area. Dinky, cute, bogus environment. And it's worth at this point casting a backward glance at Dorothy's ecstatic embrace of nature in an early, quiet and mocking passage of The Virgin's Daughter. Quote, all the riches of summer, the warmth of the earth, the song of birds, the fume of cows, the droning of countless bees, mingling and ascending like the smoke of ever-burning altars. Therefore, with angels and archangels, she began to pray, and for a moment she prayed ardently, blissfully forgetting herself in the joy of her worship. And then, less than a minute later, she discovered she was kissing the frond of the fennel that was still against her face. She checked herself instantly and drew back. She admonished herself, none of that, Dorothy, no nature worship, please. Her father had warned her against nature worship, a disgusting more than that. One of the few times one suspects that Orwell was in sympathy at some level with the rector. So we've learned that, momentarily lost my place there. Sorry. Even at the moment, just to return to coming off red, even at the moment that bowling is bending down to pick up a primrose, the impulse that finally decides him from going back to lower Binfield, he tells us that he is no wilting violet about such things. Quote, I'm not soppy about the country. I was brought up a damn sight too near it for that. I don't want to stop people living in towns or in suburbs for that matter. Let them live where they like. And I'm not suggesting that the whole of humanity could spend the whole of their lives wandering around, picking primroses and so forth. I know perfectly well that we've got to work. It's only because chaps are coughing their lungs out in mines and girls are hammering at typewriters that anyone ever has time to pick up a flower. He assesses his primrose plucking with a political cast of mind, a social conscience, an adult social conscience. And the phrase there about mine workers are surely ones that readers of Rose to Wigan Pier will swiftly recognise. The attitude to nature becoming up for air is more hard-headed even than it is in 1984. When Winston Smith dreams of what he calls the golden country, he characterises it as a place of fecundity and sexual possibility. Quote, the landscape that he was looking at recurred so often in his dreams that he was never fully certain whether or not he'd seen it in the real world. Winston and Julia do blissfully find the golden country after a fashion. And if you look at the instructions that Julia gives Winston, a 30-minute train ride from Paddington, you're potentially in the same terrain as Lower Binfield, which is a filtered version of the world that Orwell grew up in, around Henley-upon-Thames and Shipburn. But that's not the world that awaits the grown-up, married with kids bowling, who sneers with dismay during his first attempt to go fishing. I got out of the car and walked. Ah, a knot of little red and white bungalows had sprung up the side of the road. Nicely expected, of course, and there seemed to be a lot of cars standing about. As I got nearer the river, I came into the sound, yes, glog, tiddle, tiddle, plonk, yes, the sound of gramophones. The place was black with people, and where the water meadows used to be, tea houses, penny in the slot machines, sweet kiosks and chaps selling Wall's ice cream, might as well have been at the market. There's no elsewhere then for bowling to escape to. And he's not alone. As Juliet Gardner's fascinating new book, 30s, An Intimate History Makes Plain, the decade saw a newfound appetite for exploration and leisure trips among the ordinary English. The travel by car became less of an elite luxury. But the idea of escape has been undermined by the relative ease of escape, not to mention the sprawl of modern housing developments. If everyone yearns for the same solitary retreat, what you end up with is a man in a crowd.